All right. Welcome, gang, to Cosmocast. Today, we have a very special guest, Rob Ashlar, writer for Cosmonaut Magazine and author of a very interesting Substack that I highly recommend that does a lot of very good research and journalistic work on jihadism and other topics. I'm going to share it in a second. But today we're going to be talking about the topic of the axis of resistance and where it stands today, what the background of the current crisis in Gaza is. We're going to begin with October 7th and kind of do a background on how things have gotten to the point where they are today, what the current situation with the axis of resistance, which is the kind of alliance of countries around Iran and Hamas and other actors and that are currently aligned with the Palestinian resistance, and how they are currently forecasted to continue the struggle or not continue the struggle. And then after that, I think we're going to discuss what's currently going on with the protests in LA, as well as the current split or not split going on with MAGA, with Elon and Trump. So yeah, we've got a very interesting show for today, I think, and let's get going. How are you doing, Rob?
We're doing well. How should we begin this?
I think we should begin just by talking about October 7th and what our initial reactions and hopes were with October 7th and how the axis of resistance factored into it. And maybe also just kind of define what the axis of resistance actually is. Yeah. Maybe in your own definition, maybe how you would define the axis of resistance and understand it.
Yeah, sounds good. I'd say for like the axis of resistance is kind of it's their own title for the alliance of state and non-state actors, like focused on, like the ostensible focus is on anti-Zionism and like confrontation with the U.S., but like really the special focus is Palestine. And then the materially binds them together is that they're all part of like the Iranian foreign policy like orbit. All of them have had some level of Iranian, like active Iranian support, like whether it be like arms transmission, expertise, like knowledge transfer, et cetera, et cetera. That's what it is. And as for like how does access work like on the ground? As I said, it's like a mix of state and non-state actors. The state actors are Iran and Yemen. And if you want to be, I guess, really reduce it to its bare minimum, possibly Hamas, like as the government of Gaza, but I think that's a bit kind of pushing it.
Right.
And then the non-state actors are the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then, or the other previous, like, the former Assad regime was kind of a state and non-state actor. It officially had like a seat at the UN, so it was a state, but its actual functioning was essentially like a collection of militias. And we're going to discuss today what the Assad regime's role was, both within the broader axis and then also its, in my view, ongoing collapse.
Right. And so I think when October 7th broke out, I think a lot of us were kind of hoping that maybe this was going to be the final battle where Israel was going to fall. And
I don't think that's not how I feel.
Maybe, I mean,
not at all.
For me, I thought like, I shared that view, Don, that like this could actually be the final confrontation. And yeah. I think we can actually sort of get into we can jump into the motives of October 7th, because it actually like ties really closely to what is the axis of resistance.
Right.
As I said, like it's official marketing or like self-image was like, oh, we are here, we're designed for the confrontation with Israel and and against like the West. Hence the name, like, resistance. Like, we are resisting, like, the great Satan, as a lot of Axis heads often said. But like in practice, what the Axis was, and I think this has become abundantly clear since October 7th, is that it was essentially this like regional leverage to boost the Iranian negotiating position, so that like Iran obviously wants to negotiate with America. They're doing it right now as the genocide is still ongoing and entering its, as of now, like worst phase. So they have no qualms with negotiating with America. We've seen this many times in the past. And so, but like they obviously want to negotiate with America, but they justifiably don't trust America. They aren't just going to take what America says at face value. So they want to have some kind of negotiating or like to boost their negotiating position, some kind of leverage to make America actually hold up its end of the bargain. And that's what the axis of resistance was. That's why Hezbollah was the crown jewel of the axis. And that, on the one hand, yes, it was this extremely strong actor within Lebanon itself, but people don't really appreciate oftentimes just sort of how transnational Hezbollah's footprint was. Like it fought in Syria, like it played a very key role there. The replies are already getting good.
Yeah, we already have some idiots coming along. Just ignore
them. But anyway, like obviously, their intervention in Syria, but then they also played a key role in Iraq, like training the PMF, like building up this sort of militant network to confront Islamic State, and then also to sort of seize the Iraqi state. And in Yemen, they also sent advisors and actual experts to assist Ansar Allah, or colloquially the Houthis, in their civil war. So Hezbollah has a really wide footprint, and it plays a very key role for the axis. And all of these actors together, they, again, as I said, they boost the Iranian negotiating position against the West. And therefore, and this is where the role of Palestine is actually very, very critical, because it provides really powerful legitimacy. Because without Palestine, why would Arabs care about boosting Iranian leverage? Why should Arabs in Syria or Iraq, which were the key components of the axis, why should they fucking care about what's it called, about Iran's foreign policy stuff? But if they can reasonably believe that all of this is for the Palestinian cause, which I think was actually sincere. I don't think they were entirely cynical about it. Then it's all right, let's fucking then if there's a reasonable, I know, it's just right in front of me. If there was a way to if there was a reasonable justification, or if there's a reason to believe that actually no, all of this is it isn't just for Iran, it's actually fighting Israel in the West, then it's worth it. And that's why there was a lot of this focus on, that was partially why there was all this focus on Palestine, on confronting Israel. So then let's jump forward a bit. That's kind of setting the stage. We get to October 7th, and there was a really good thread by somebody, I forget their exact ad, but it's basically OG Hoop something on Twitter, and their case was that what October 7th was supposed to do is that it was meant to short circuit the broader system, and this is also Nebraska Zemi's analysis. It was essentially forcing or coercing the broader axis to enter the actual final confrontation that they talked so much about, by precipitating a very serious conflict. I don't know, and I don't think anybody, even maybe Sinwar, foresaw just how horrific the violence would get, but few people would see it. But few people would have seen this extent of it. But everyone must have known that's what was coming after October 7th would be horrific. And I think the logic was that by engineering or by causing this really intense crisis, the Axis will be forced to intervene, because Israel is not able to, as we saw, not able to contain itself to Gaza. It would begin fighting Lebanon, it would begin fighting Yemen, it would continue its strikes on Syria, and it would perhaps escalate to Iraq and then Iran itself. And this way, the entire Axis would be activated and confront Israel, whether it liked it or not. Previously, before the Lebanon war, Hezbollah was viewed as the biggest actual threat to Israel. And the hope before the Lebanon war began, I think, I'm not sure like when this hope, so to speak, dimmed, if it ever did, but the idea was that if Hezbollah like really fights, if Hezbollah really fights Israel, then like this is it. They'll start bombing Israeli civilian society, they'll start bombing Israeli like normal infrastructure. Like essentially like the whole premise of Israel is you live in a first world country in a third world region, and you get to you face no consequences.
Right.
You pay any of the actual costs of living in the Middle East. If Hezbollah would be able to change that equation, and without that, if people in Israel, if Zionist settlers genuinely like could reasonably expect like, oh, I might actually die today because of a missile, or I might not be able to get electricity or clean water or anything like that, then what's the point of me living here? I can just go to like America or England or some other rich country. And that way the project as a whole faces huge crisis. That I think was the logic, that was the hope of October 7th. There's some, like there was an Israeli report that argued that this was a hope, like there was the goal was to essentially end Israel right then and there, to create this big final confrontation. My personal view is that obviously it was like to coerce. I agree with the view that it was like to coerce the Axis into confronting Israel. But I don't think the idea of a total regional war had been conceived by Hamas when doing the operation. I think that element started creeping in by January, February 2024, when it was clear that this was not going to end anytime soon, that they were in this for the long haul. And if Gaza was to endure that, then its role was to be a human matchstick, essentially to set fire to the status quo of the Middle East. Because on the one hand, it's very stable. You have America enforcing this fucking nightmare. But on the other hand, people can't live like this forever. And if there is some kind of precipitating event that can set it all ablaze, then in this case, it would be the war and then rather the genocide in Gaza. And I think here, how I've tried to understand October 7th, the logic of it is as like strategic accelerationism. Again, this guy, Nebras Kazemi, he compares Sinwar to Zarqawi in Iraq, which I think I initially bristled at that comparison because these are obviously very different individuals. Like Sinwar isn't a fucking like mass murderer lunatic.
Yeah.
But the
Hello?
sorry about that. Someone's knocking on my door. Actually, hang on. Give me a few minutes.
You're good, you're good. No, but yeah, that is kind of how I understood the logic of October 7th was.
Yeah, I think it's important to distinguish also the motivations of leadership, parts of the leadership from even the actors on the ground, right?
Right.
I think a huge part of it also was diplomatically isolating Israel. I mean, that is sort of the FLN style strategy, right? You destabilize the situation, you reveal the dynamics, you intensify those dynamics, and you show the whole world the horror, right? And in so doing, the hope is to isolate the aggressor, the oppressor, right? And that is in part why the French had to give up Algeria, because the repression became so brutal, the level of torture, displacement, genocide became so obvious that eventually America had to say, no more. You guys have to leave. You guys have to leave. Amongst other things, though, that played a role too.
Yeah.
So this like final conflict is envisioned not as a conventional military conflict.
No. I mean, it can't be because of the asymmetry of force. I mean, in Algeria, at least, the Maquis or the resistance was largely defeated militarily. The Battle of Algiers, despite all of the romance around it, was actually a major military setback for the National Liberation Forces in Algeria, which is the armed wing of the FLN.
Right.
Yeah, so, in that way, I think that might have been also a motivation, right? It's to have this final confrontation, bring in the Axis to fight, but I think also it was to morally reveal the essence of Zionism, right? And so doing, try to isolate the Israelis, which, by the way, actually has
That is working
people
spectacularly.
The international
It's very hard to argue that hasn't worked. That
the international community had been allowing a slow strangulation of Gazan life for decades at this point. They were going to disappear in history. They were all going to die off and be left in the invisible patch of history. But for this, quite frankly, and now are forced to look at the context. Maybe if you could, Rob, if you could elucidate a bit more what the Hamas leadership was thinking, and maybe also talk about the motivation of the actors themselves, the 20 who actually were engaged, and then maybe also talk about one thing that is always necessary to understand is the Gaza, the context of Gaza.
This actually ties into like the point I was making earlier before I had to step away. I was like the exact motives of Hamas. Initially, I think it was just like recenter the Palestinian cause and like use a humanitarian crisis. Although I don't think they thought it would reach this point. To expose what Israel is, expose what the U.S. is, and like keep the Palestinian national question alive. Because again, as you guys said, people are saying in the chat, like with the Abraham Accords, it was dying, if not like practically dead. And now it's like this is a question that like basically every young person in America, if not the broader West, views as like this is a legitimately important thing. They may not know that much about it. They may not know how to solve it, but that like this is an unspeakable injustice that must be righted. That's basically indisputable now amongst like young people. So they succeeded with that. And then for the point I was trying to make of like the comparison between like Nebraska Kazemi draws between like Sinwar and Zarqawi was essentially to like throw the region into very far into the unknown, something like this completely unforeseen realm in which basically no actor has control. Like before October 7th, it was Israel and the US that were in control without question. For several months, I would say for 6 to even 8 months afterwards, it was very up in the air. Who is actually like directing events? Who is the one really pushing things? And I'd say the first like 3-4 months, it was Hamas who had the initiative. That they were the ones who had really gotten history moving. Israel was in this very reactive, very sort of chaotic state. They were in this genocidal hysteria, which they're still in, but like they didn't have the initiative. They weren't decisively winning like they are now. And the benefit of that kind of situation is that if no one has control, and if you're the one who set off the event, you are able to better set the direction of the chaos, like on your own terms. And that I think is like what Sinwar and what at least the military command of Qassam were trying to do, like within Gaza, like from within Gaza to like the broader region. And I'm hoping that like explains about the sort of strategic accelerationist and like the broader like geopolitical logic of October 7th, at least as I understand it.
Oh yeah, that definitely makes sense, and that lines up with basically how I kind of understood everything going with Hamas and the kind of
it might be. It might be worth maybe now going into the history of the genocide itself and of the armed resistance. So I guess we can start off where things are now, which is horrifying, and then maybe rewind.
Yeah.
And maybe you could lead us up to this point.
Yeah, so as to where we are right now is basically the general's plan that was inflicted upon the North from early October of last year to the ceasefire. So what is it, like 3-4 months? That was or rather 3 months. That has now been imposed upon all of Gaza. Nothing has come in. Practically nothing has come in. The situation there is unspeakable. It's basically like there's now ongoing famine. Like people are dying from hunger. And the regional situation is very bleak. Hezbollah is, at least for now and for the near future, finished, like operationally. They can't fight. I think for me, one of the bleakest moments of this was that when when they issued a statement like calling out to like our Arab and Islamic nation to stop the crimes in Gaza, like this is an Arab League statement. This is the kind of thing that Hezbollah used to make fun of.
Yeah.
Rockets. And now they're the ones making these statements. Like, this is a really strong sign that they're not coming back into the fight. They're done. And that was Hamas's most important ally, because they were directly confronting Israel. We can criticize, and I will be criticizing the role of like Hezbollah's like actual action in the north. I don't think it was sufficient. I think if they escalated, this conflict would have been wrapped up sooner. But they were still fighting. They were actually fucking giving up blood, giving up. They really sacrificed a lot, especially like in the final months for Gaza. No one can ever take that away from them. And anyone who slanders Hezbollah really needs to, like, they need to shut the fuck up because of what they gave up. But Hezbollah is now out. The PMF in Iraq, they were always bullshitting in my view. I think they actually are totally worth insulting. The Assad regime has literally collapsed. It does not exist anymore. That Syria is no longer a part of the axis of resistance. The only ones who are still fighting are Yemen. They're the only ones still committed to this and still willing to escalate. Iran is now trying to negotiate with the U.S. basically a new Iran deal, which, I mean, I find it galling. Like, after all these years of promising to fight Israel and fight the West and free Palestine, now that this genocide is happening, they're negotiating with America. They're begging for a deal. I find it utterly disgusting. So, like, as for where Gaza goes from this, I mean, I think the risk of physical extermination is extremely real. I don't think we should cope and act like, oh, resistance will always exist. No, like, you can destroy resistance. That's what they did in Indonesia. What they're trying to do now. But there are glimmers of hope. Kataib al-Qassam and the resistance as a whole is operationally still very effective. The IDF aren't really that, like, on the ground, the IDF isn't really that competent. Their advantage is in the fact that they have the entire West backing them. Like, in a square fight, we've seen, like, through, like, in numerous instances that they aren't really that good at fighting. So the question then is, like, who can last longer? Can Gaza outlast the growing international pariahdom that Israel is succumbing to? Because, like, the Financial Times is now openly talking about, no, we need to seize Israeli reserves. We need to impose economic sanctions. We need to end all trade deals. Like, these are, like, this isn't just, like, token gestures of, like, condemnation. Like, this is like,
no, the Europeans are starting to, minus the British, but many of the Europeans are starting to really sour on all this.
Like, this is
the French, even the Germans are starting to get critical, which is Israel is, I mean, there's been kind of a turning point. The reality of famine has started to kick in. But there has been a turning point, it seems, in European public opinion, not only public opinion, but the opinion of the ruling elite. Right. And in that way, I think it's fair to say that Israel is a total fucking pariah.
Yes.
I mean, there was recently a vote in the UN, right, over ceasefire, and the single country that voted against it was the US, like, on the Security Council. So Israel is diplomatically completely fucked.
Yeah, like, there's no way. This isn't like Iraq where you can kind of brush it aside. Because at least Iraq is still, like, a country officially. Like, it's still, like, there's still something you can call Iraq, and, like, it's sort of functioning vaguely. You can't fucking move past genocide. Something this so obscene that has been broadcasted so vividly at every single moment of every single day. Like, this is not, the world will never forgive this, and it will not forget it. And you can see, like, the effect of this, like, on how Israeli propaganda, initially, like, Hezbollah was basically just, like, this bullshit. Like, the nature of Hezbollah has changed from all these lies that, like, portraying Israel as this liberal, woke society. That has all completely gone away. Now it's just, like, they're now just, like, openly advocating law of the jungle. It's like, no, this is something we should be doing, which, like, that indirectly concedes that we can't justify this morally. So we're just saying it's okay because we can do it.
Right. They've
I
just
think
gone like
the other-
full like Ubermensch, like
Yeah.
will to power.
I
Basically.
feel like the other tactic is also like if they can't portray themselves as moral, portray their enemy as inhuman, right?
Yeah.
That's all they have left. Oh, we killed children. Well, they want to kill all our children, as if that were some moral argument. It's anyways, yeah, maybe we should go from the period that we are now to
like chronology.
Yeah,
since October 7th.
yeah.
Okay.
If it's possible to periodize,
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I think just sort of off the dome, I'm working on a piece about like access strategy since October 7th. So like this is, kind of like not ironed out yet. But I think the first period was from October 7th to the Saleh al-Aruri assassination in Lebanon, which was like early January. That was when Israel was really like in a state of chaos. They really thought it was the end. And I think they were justified in that thought. Had Hezbollah fully escalated, had the Axis as a whole fully escalated, I mean, Herzi Halevi himself said, had Hezbollah invaded from the north, they would have, Nasrallah and Sinwar would have both met in Tel Aviv. And I don't think that's just some hysterical bullshit. I think Halevi was right. And the Israelis were aware of this. That's what drove their hysteria, their complete fucking like genocidal mania. So that was like a very critical period. Like right after, like on October 8th, Nasrallah, he opened up the Lebanon front by beginning the attacks on the northern settlements. Then a month in early November, Yemen imposes the Red Sea blockade. And then I think also PMF, they began their front, such as it was like shortly after Hezbollah. So the whole network had activated, and Israel really felt that it was facing the end. But we can right away see some issues, like some cracks in the Axis strategy. Their whole thing is like unity of fronts. That like if Gaza is fighting, then the rest of us fight. If Lebanon is fighting, then the rest of us fight, et cetera, et cetera. But there was an Israeli report that argued that Hamas was hoping to like do the final confrontation beginning on October 7th, maybe not like into the crisis. And it was hoping to get and there was like some sort of like prior agreement in the Axis that like they would also attack Israel, but that they kind of chickened out. That was an Israeli report. I think it was interesting. I personally don't buy that. My view is that Hamas presented the world and the Axis in particular with a fait accompli, like the October 7th operation, and said you need to intervene now. And that was the hope. And what we ended up seeing, like how did the Axis respond to this fait accompli? They blinked. They didn't intervene. Someone mentioned in the comments like the IDF thought that Hezbollah would invade the Galilee. And like again, like if this had happened, then I think like Israel as a whole we probably would be fucking seeing the collapse of Israel right now. But they didn't do that. Apparently, there's this Arabi Al Jadid broadcast from like a pro Hezbollah, like a guy who's close to them. He said that Tehran actually didn't want Nasrallah to open the northern front, and that he essentially did it unilaterally. Given Iranian actions like through the broader crisis, I actually do believe this. I do think Iran was like, don't get involved in this mess because like this is. They also sort of perceived the fucking danger that it was. But Nasrallah, I mean, just sort of out of a moral thing, he didn't want to watch besiege Gaza endure this and not do anything. I mean, I don't think it was in him to do that. So he put Hezbollah and southern Lebanon as a whole on the line. So that I think the initial intervention could have been like it wasn't as much as perhaps as was necessary to knock out Israel, but I think intervening on its own was enough. Like that was still like that was the right move. And had they escalated in this initial period of like October to early January, then and I'll get to that question in a moment about
yeah, just get to it when you can.
I think had they escalated in that, the situation would be far better, far more favorable to the Axis. And then regarding the death of Raisi, I don't believe it. Raisi was alive for the first couple of months, like during this critical period that I'm discussing, and Iran's actions were still quite cynical. They were not fucking doing anything. I don't really believe the whole axis cope that Pezeshkian bears special responsibility. He's not helping, to be clear. Like he's not some positive influence in this, but I think this is just a fact of like Iranian foreign policy. They're not gonna fucking stick their neck out for this at the end of the day, as we're watching literally right now. So that's the first period, and then it's bookended by the assassination of Saleh al-Aruri, and here we see the first real sign of trouble. Actually, if this is the second sign, the first sign was a report published early December 2023 from Combating Terrorism Center, which is like the US's think tank on guerrilla movements. And the report essentially said it was a really long analysis of the PMF and how they've seized control of the Iraqi state. And at the end, one of the conclusions, it's one of the most striking things I've read. It's an analysis of their front, of their anti-American front, like at the time of writing. And the author says that the main purpose of this is mostly like for show. The attacks are designed not to be fatal and not to cause any real issues because they aren't using the necessary tactics to cause fatalities. They aren't using the right weaponry. They're targeting mostly empty bases. Like there's a lot of fishy things that aren't really adding up if they were trying to kill Americans. And when I first read that in early December, I thought, okay, like that's when I dismissed the PMF as a support front. I thought this is just bullshit. They're just doing this to sate their base because if PMS leadership is cynical, a lot of the fighters, like no fucking self-respecting Arab, can watch what's happening and stand by it. Especially if you got fucking guns and a lot of money.
Yeah.
So that was the first sign. The second sign was the assassination of Saleh al-Aruri. And then the Hezbollah's response. They previously claimed that there's this capital for capital equation. If you attack Beirut, we will attack Tel Aviv. In the response, they did not attack Tel Aviv. And that, I think, should have caused alarm. Because why are they breaking their own rules, so to speak? They should have imposed a cost. They politically could have gotten away with it had they imposed that cost, because this is a time when Israel is in really, is very politically unstable. And really does not perceive itself to be secure. That's the first period. Before I get into the next one, is there anything unclear so far?
No, that's all very clear. I think so. I think that makes a lot of sense. That basically Hezbollah does not do a tit for tat retaliation, and that kind of sets a stage to where because that's basically kind of from my limited knowledge of Hezbollah, that was one of the ways that they were able to actually impose cost on Israel and be effective.
Yeah. So that was the initial period. Then the next, I think, was from January to April. This is when I think Israel steadily began to regain the initiative. It was the genocide just continued. Like I remember at the time thinking, like just sort of being speechless of like, why isn't Hezbollah escalating? Why aren't the Axis doing anything? There were more. The images that were coming out of Gaza were becoming, at least for me, I thought there was like a real shift in just how severe things were getting. We were moving, like, this isn't to say that like the period before was good, obviously not, but it felt like, okay, we're entering into like a new ring of hell. This is getting really, really bad. Why isn't the Axis like escalating here? And I think I also suspect that Hamas is privately thought that as well.
Right.
I don't think they did attacks on Haifa. It was like, because they didn't attack Haifa until quite late into the conflict, which is was another cause for like alarm for me. But again, from January to April, there's like political stability is like slowly coming back to Israel. Like Netanyahu, you can sort of track this with Netanyahu's approval rating. It was rock bottom after October 7th. In this period, slowly starts climbing up, suggesting that like Israeli society as a whole is beginning to trust him again to handle this. And the end of it was when Israel attacked the Iranian embassy in Syria, killing the IRGC general and a couple other like pretty important Axis people. This is like when Iran actually finally had to really say something. and be like, all right, we need to, like, we're going to do something now. During all this time, I'm reading a bunch of like U.S. military reports, and also in early April, another report comes out from that same center I mentioned, Combatant Terrorism Center, analyzing the Axis conduct, with particular focus on the Houthis or Ansar Allah. And they said that Ansar Allah they had thrown down the gauntlet. They had escalated by far the most, and they were politically gaining the most. They were really they were punching well above their weight. And there was a line in that analysis which I thought was really striking. The author said that Hezbollah was mostly sticking to the rules of the game, quote, which, again, for me, that I found that very alarming. That these people think that Hezbollah is deliberately choosing not to escalate and is willing to sit within the bounds that they've determined as
right. Like you don't want to be playing according to the rules of the game, according to the Americans.
Yeah, like you want to be breaking them, you want to be escalating like Yemen was.
Right.
So the dude, the IRGC guy, Zahedi, he dies or he's killed in Syria, which again, like the role of Syria in all this is like they're completely fucking silent during all of this. They're not doing anything. There's no Golan front being opened. Privately, the Yemen would later reveal after the collapse of the regime that they had repeatedly requested Assad to open a Golan front. If need be, the Yemenis would send people to Syria to fight if like the SAA couldn't spare anybody. And there was another interview with a newspaper chief who was like pretty well informed in Tehran, who said that even Iran was like around this time trying to get Assad to open the Golan front. They apparently had some like well advanced base there, but Assad refused, and crucially Russia refused. Russia said no, you cannot open this, and that kind of vetoed the operation. What would have been an operation.
Can't say I'm surprised there.
Yeah, like I mean, like Russia's role is fucking like in all of this unbelievably malevolent.
Yeah.
Like letting Israel just like strike at will in Syria. So like I think I personally consider them like a quiet belligerent against the Axis, whatever their rhetoric may have been. But now I'm sort of digressing. We get to there's like 2 weeks when Iran was telegraphing its reprisal for Zahedi. That I found, like at the time, I thought like, I was like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Why are you waiting so long? Then once the attack happened, I thought, okay, this looks pretty legit. They forced the West to reveal its anti-air apparatus, like the whole like network that would be used to deflect Iranian missiles. Like that was like Iran had forced them to reveal that and use it so that now they could gather all this intelligence. But in hindsight, I think that attack was wildly insufficient. I think the telegraph nature of it, the actual like kinetic force that was used, this was not enough. They needed to have used a whole lot more. They needed to have really made Israel pay consequences for killing one of their fucking top generals. Their refusal to do that indicated to Israel that, okay, now we now have the initiative and we can start escalating as much as we want. There's another argument to say that they actually did reestablish deterrence, but they didn't build on the momentum that was built by the attack. In either case, that I think is a bit more, I'm not entirely convinced of that, but I think the case for it is reasonable. But whatever actually transpired, whatever like version of events, what actually transpired is that Iran did not establish deterrence long term. Israel regained the initiative decisively, in my point of view. I think early April is when Israel was like, all right, now we are in charge of the conflict. We are the ones directing the pace of it. We're the ones putting everyone else on the back foot. We are now in charge. That was, I think, the really key moment when things started to really go downhill for the Axis. And like, as a kind of alt history, so to speak, had Iran done what True Promise 2 was, with all those ballistic missiles in October, if they had done that in April, I think deterrence very decisively would have been established. I think the Israelis would have been pretty spooked.
Yeah.
Because that attack was actually pretty serious, but it just came way too fucking late. And we'll get to that soon.
Hold on. Somebody mentions Assad kicked Ansar Allah from Damascus in the first week of the war. Is that true?
Yep. I completely forgot about that. But yeah, like, I mean, this is during all of this, you have Assad just quietly sabotaging the Axis. Like he's fulfilling his minimum obligations to transfer Iranian weaponry to Lebanon for Hezbollah, but like he was openly telegraphing alignment to the UAE and KSA to get for renormalization and for reconstruction funds. That was his end game. And Assad thought that because I'm too essential for the Axis, they won't discipline me. I can get away with it. So they're just going to put up with it. I mean, which in a long pattern of very idiotic, arrogant thought from the Assad regime.
Yeah.
Like that clearly didn't fucking that clearly didn't pan out for him.
I mean, there's a long history of the Assad family behaving in this way towards the Palestinian struggle, so it's
they have a very instrumentalist relation to the Palestinian struggle. It's basically always been that way.
Yeah, so like we have Assad here doing the shit, and then there's also long-standing rumors of people within the regime selling out Axis assets. I recently spoke to somebody from the Bekaa Valley, and which is that's like a Hezbollah. Hezbollah is very strong there, and this guy knew quite a lot. I trust him because he's critical of Hezbollah, but obviously a supporter, as he should be. But he said that like within Hezbollah, like I'm in the ranks, people did not fucking trust the regime, whether it was like perceived treachery that these people would sell us out, or because they were so incompetent and so filled to the brim with spies, monitored by the Israelis, that proximity to them would endanger us. Like that was how. So like I mean, Syria is like this giant fucking leaking sieve. Any information that's shared with them is shared with Israel in practice, whether willingly or unwillingly. One I think really unnerving instance of Hezbollah's distrust of the regime, they refused SAA liaisons whenever patrolling out in the Badia, the big desert in Syria. And the reason for this was that they thought, if we let the SAA hang out with us, one of them is going to sell us out either to Israel, or one of them is a fucking IS guy and is going to call in a patrol from the desert. Because it was well known that Islamic State had moles in the SAA in the Badia region. So like you have this fucking massive liability while in the middle of this enormous crisis where you cannot afford leaks. You cannot afford any kind of like cracks in the armor.
Yeah, I mean the Syrian state at that point was so cancered. It lost all discipline over time.
Yeah, it was just infuriating to watch. I mean, like the consistent refusal to open a Golan front. A lot of the justification for it at the time was
maybe it's because I'm naive and I'm not an expert in these things, but I never would have assumed they would.
I thought that like I didn't think that
or Iran for that matter. I was even the kind of token or symbolic strikes that they committed. I sort of went against what I thought they would do. I had no trust in any of them.
I mean, like
the only one that I had some faith that they would actually fight beyond Yemen, which is is Hezbollah, and so seeing their defeat was particularly
very shocking.
It was very demoralizing because it was the only, for many years, effective resistance.
For sure.
And so that was the one that was more. But Syria, and Iran.
I didn't ever expect the Assad regime itself to open the Golan front. I thought the rest of the Axis would essentially coerce him into doing it, because like they're the ones who fucking saved him. They don't have he's not the one who has the leverage. It's them. But the
Assads don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. They have no loyalty to anyone. You could save them from being thrown off the plank into an ocean of sharks, and they would the next moment stab you in the back.
Yeah,
I mean, it's in truly like of all the Baathists, the least principled.
For sure, it was. So yeah, you have this fucking enormous liability during this entire crisis, like during the whole timeline that I'm going to go over. But yeah, so that's the January to April period. Like it ends with Israel decisively regaining initiative, Iran failing to establish deterrence, and the Axis now very thoroughly put on the back foot. the next period, I think, is April to early July. Again, it's like the same trends as from January to April are accelerating. The genocide is worsening. The regional conflict is escalating slowly. Like the strikes in the north are rather. Let me rephrase. The strikes on Lebanon, southern Lebanon, are getting worse. Like displacing more and more people, ruining more and more land, killing more and more innocent people. But the Hezbollah strikes are not escalating in the north. They're still hammering the few, like those border settlements, when they should have been, in my view, going deeper into Israel, going against Haifa, and obviously, and of course, if possible, against Tel Aviv. They had the weaponry to do it. Now like given what we've seen happen to them, like we don't know if they actually had the intelligence ability to do it, in the sense that if they tried, maybe they would have been fucked over in the process, but who knows? They didn't try to, so we can't really say. But they're like during this period, I think this is like when Hezbollah's persistent refusal to escalate in the desperate hopes of a ceasefire deal had deadly consequences, not just for Gaza, but for themselves. They were losing. I think this is like when they began really losing people, like top-ranked people. And again, like about the point of displacement, there were 80,000 northern settlers displaced. It's worth comparing. This is something that a friend of mine mentioned to me. In 2006, the war, which is rightly considered a resounding Lebanon Hezbollah victory, displaced 300,000 northern Israelis. In this one, they only displaced 80,000, despite having far greater capabilities. That alone, for me, like once I found that out, I thought that was pretty alarming. I thought this is like, why are they being so reluctant? Why are they being so hesitant? Like something is really, really wrong here. Like, this is not the fucking time to be like waiting around.
It's a question worth, I want to ask you, which is, do you think that the Hezbollah leadership saw the viciousness of the Israeli response? The fact that basically the Israelis were acting with zero moral compunction, and were worried that they would apply the same sort of force to Lebanon as well. In other words, they were scared. They were scared of escalating things because they knew that the Israelis would have no limits.
For sure. I think that was the main reason that they didn't escalate. They were terrified, justifiably, of what would come. We sort of saw an indication of it during the September to November war. Like fucking New York Times itself was reporting, this fascist newspaper was saying that Israeli strikes are taking on a distinctly sectarian pattern, targeting Shiite regions, forcing Shiite displacement into regions with other sects, and creating these communal tensions. Like it was a very malevolent.
The idea is to have people blame the Shia.
Yeah, for this.
I mean, and at this point in the war, the Israelis are just bombing the shit out of southern Lebanon and Beirut, and making no distinction between civilian and military.
Absolutely.
Like nothing. And whatever criticisms people can levy against Hezbollah, all of the evidence showed that they were more or less trying to target either settler, which are illegal occupations, or military installation.
They were. This, I think, actually is like them trying to do that to sort of discrimination and attack. I think that was a critical flaw. It was morally, like in the sense of we are the better. We're not like Israel. It was morally obviously better in that sense, but strategically, like the whole point of a settler colony is that like settlers are living well. Especially with Israeli society, the line is very blurred. So I think that kind of that distinction that they made was strategically faulty. I don't think they should have made that. But to answer your question in short, yes, I think that they were terrified of what would be visited upon Lebanon, and they were hoping to de-escalate as an off-ramp from that. The issue is that with Israel in the West, there is no such thing as a fucking off-ramp. They tried to avoid what ended up happening anyway. So like the net of it was southern Lebanon and Hezbollah were severely destroyed, and they didn't do what they could have for Gaza. And then I think I've seen this like in some Arabic language media that like has been so disillusioning for a lot of Axis people is that we didn't even really fight as we could have. the fight that we put up wasn't enough for what we ended up having to pay. We could have done more, and that I think is a really potent, like that is a really potent.
Yeah, I mean, Arabs in general, whenever, when it was the previous wars in the 60s and 70s, whenever there were losses, it's a demoralizing event.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's a humiliation. It dehumanizes you.
Yeah.
People very personally, right?
Yeah, it was.
That's why 2006 was so important too, and why Hezbollah did gain a lot of prominence in the Arab world, even from people who have ideologically nothing to do with that.
Yeah, like I mean, I think people really. I think even now on the left, a lot of people do not appreciate just the amount of prestige that Hezbollah had, like before the Syria intervention. Like there were, like I remember, like on old jihadist forums, like on archive pages, I've seen fucking like self-professed AQ supporters, like during when the war was, like the 2006 war was ongoing, saying, "Oh, we're supporting Hezbollah because they're fighting Israel." That's how much moral currency they had at the time. And to see them like defeated like this is the effect of it is devastating.
It's a shock it's shocking.
So all those trends are, like as I said, the previous trends like discussed, they're worsening in this April to July period, and it's bookended again with another set of assassinations. This time against Fuad Shukr, Hezbollah's second in command, like basically the number 2 after Nasrallah, and Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. I remember like when I found out about Haniyeh, I thought I was speechless. Like it felt like a punch to the gut. Like you can't fucking you can't kill a fucking diplomat in a foreign country's capital. Like this is an obscene escalation. And so this happens, and like that, and then this is also, I think, the first Israeli strike against Yemen, the port of Hodeidah. So right then and there, you actually have kind of the perfect justification for unity of fronts, like this joint attack. In Al-Akhbar, the Lebanese like pro-Axis newspaper, they were signaling some kind of joint operation from Yemen, from Lebanon, from Iran against Israel as like retaliation for all these different like obscene strikes. But what ended up happening is that the fronts were broken. Each of the partners had to respond individually, and this is like if the Axis strategy was unity of fronts, the Israeli strategy was to break up the fronts and destroy them one by one. And they, at this point, achieved that. They had broken the fronts. I think privately, I've read some account that Ansarallah was really lobbying for a joint attack. I totally believe this, given how radical they have been through the entire crisis. I think Hezbollah may have wanted to. They probably would have escalated if they got the backing from Iran, but Iran, we now know, they held off on their retaliation for a full 2 months in the hopes they were listening to the Americans for some fucking reason. Again, that there was a ceasefire coming just around the corner. That they kept hearing this shit from Blinken and Jake Sullivan, and they paused. In waiting that long to retaliate against Haniyeh, the Israelis correctly assessed we can get away with anything, or near anything. Like now we know we're in charge. If Zahedi was like a strong clue of it, this is confirmation. The response to Shukr, there was this they called it Operation Arba'in, and it was like, this is the infamous chicken farm incident, where Hezbollah attacked another border settlement, and they called it a great success. It was only like, I think, 300 or 400 Katyusha rockets sent over, and like this is, for killing your second in command, this is wildly insufficient. This is not like what the response should be. But that's what it ended up being, and with all that together, it sent a very bad message. It sent a very poor message of like Axis unity and Axis willingness to fight. It again signaled to the West that Hezbollah wasn't willing to escalate, that they were going to stick to the rules of the game, even if it hurt them, even if they were losing their top people, and Iran wouldn't be backing any kind of escalation. It was, in fact, refusing to retaliate.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating because I remember when the assassinations happened and everyone's saying Iran is going to retaliate any day now. It's going to be huge. It's going to be the biggest thing ever. The whole colony is going to be on fire.
Iranians in Iran,
Yeah, they did.
"quote unquote" peace. Like they don't
fucking care.
I don't understand where people got that. Like, as someone who doesn't have any special insight in the situation, I could tell Iran was just buying time. They didn't want to get involved.
The number one goal is normalization of relations with the U.S. so they can gain access to the global financial.
Right. But I understand, like people were desperate for something to happen to end this genocide that was happening, and you don't want to be the person who's just like,
there's no hope.
There's no hope. Nothing's going to happen. Because there really was no one else who could do anything, it seemed like.
But you have to have a sober analysis of the
exactly. You want to have a sober analysis. You want to be realistic. You don't want to take, you claim false victories and tell lies,
I mean, I remember, like, the thing that comes to mind is when many years ago, Israel had some robot sniper, like, literally
fucking scientists.
Yeah, just shoot a scientist, like, in Iran. And nothing happened. I mean, they can kill leading generals in Syria or in Iraq, wherever they want. They can do anything they want to Iran. And quite frankly, from what I can tell, Iran never retaliates.
Yeah, it was, I mean, like, they always Iran always justified as like strategic patience. It's like, oh, we're not going to do this like knee-jerk reaction that the Arab states did during the 20th century. That was how it was framed. I personally didn't buy it because at a certain point, like, strategic patience just turns into like, I'm just letting you beat me up, which, like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, you're getting beat up regardless. Like, you're not winning here. It was, yeah. And then there's a really, if you could flash this up on screen. Like, there's a comment saying, like, Iran's justification to make their own economy and like the worst condition and make their own people suffer was that it's to resist Israel. Like, all these sacrifices in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iran, all of this was justified in the name of confronting Israel. And then when the confrontation happens, they don't fucking do it. They don't actually escalate and fight. I remember during, like, when all this shit was happening and, like, seeing a lot of Axis, like, social media circles, like, acting as if they were still winning, I thought I was going crazy. Because, like, this is not, if Israel's fucking killing these people, if they're killing the top negotiator, Haniyeh was a negotiator in Doha or in Cairo. If they're killing him and there's no fucking retaliation for it, what the fuck is going on?
I mean, it just that very phrase, killing the head negotiator in a foreign country,
is ridiculous.
I don't think people get how egregious an action. I can't think of a single modern state that has done that in the 20th century. I can't think of one instance where that had been done before. Can anyone? I can't.
It's fucking insane. Like,
not even the Nazis did that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like,
they didn't kill Soviet emigres. They didn't, or like Soviet like diplomats. They had their own relations. Diplomats are not. They're, by definition, since like fucking ancient times, you aren't supposed to kill them because who are you going to negotiate with to end this?
Yeah.
When that happened, I was like, this is it. Like, this has to. It's now or never now.
No, I mean, they're operating by, Zack Snyder 300 morality. I mean, it's really barbaric. I don't think people get the level. I mean, it's the other thing that's been infuriating, not that I have much faith in international law, but just at this point, the lie of international law has just been exposed before all.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically a tool for the U.S. and the Israelis to do whatever the fuck they want. And then whenever anyone else doesn't live up to those standards, they can morally browbeat them. It's infuriating. You feel like you're living in a moral nightmare, a Kafkaesque universe, where a certain set of people have to abide by a set of laws or rules, and the enemy can do whatever the hell they want and get away with it.
It really shows, like, it's like this nakedly, like, global white supremacist project. Like, I can't even like. I remember like when I was younger thinking that Iraq and Afghanistan would be the worst thing I would ever see in my life. This is a million times worse in just how blatantly fascist it is. Like they're very openly saying, if you are not fucking a member of the white race, you do not matter. As represented like with all this whole charade of international law.
Yeah, I mean, I also thought this is as hypocritical as the U.S. can get when it all happened. The sort of things you would read about, and apparently we were wrong.
Yeah,
which
no,
is unbelievable.
Which makes me worried about like what comes next, because this is
it's absolutely terrifying, because I really do think that now that the U.S. Doesn't even like believe in its own like rules-based international order, like it no longer has like any kind of moral hegemony to like kind of uphold its supremacy over the world. So now it's just naked, like,
yeah, they don't even try to like generate something like white man's burden. Just
right. It's just going to be pure race war, I think.
Force and violence, and you're going to deal with it because we can. It's actually law of the jungle. It's like
it's just going to be all against all. Whoever can enforce their will by military might, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's literally like, if you think about it in terms of quote unquote Western civilization, that's a regression before Plato, where you actually have to like justify your rule and your force. They're like, no, we're gonna just export violence and barbarism.
Yeah,
and you're gonna deal with it.
That's actually, I kind of have. That's my next question for Rob, though, is considering what you've said about how the individual actors in the Axis of Resistance conceived of this action. What, and seeing how it didn't pan out, how no one sort of jumped into the fray. What's the future of the conflict then? I mean, they can't win. Like Hamas is, Hamas is done. So is Hezbollah. They can't win a conventional military conflict. So what's the goal here?
I wouldn't say Hamas is done, because Hamas, like on the ground, is still operational. They can still fight, but the others are out. Yemen is still in. I think, like, I mean, for me, my view has been that like the only I even wrote about this some time ago. The only way this ends, and this has been the case since the beginning, is total regional war where Israel is destroyed. The Axis lost their opportunity to initiate that confrontation. Now the only actor willing and capable of doing it is paradoxically Israel, in their own fanaticism and in their own like delusional mania. Like, this is what, like, they might be the ones to strike Iran, and Iran is willing to sacrifice the rest of the Axis so long as it itself is not harmed. It will not fucking tolerate its own cities being bombed relentlessly in the way that Lebanon or Gaza have been bombed. It will fucking respond to that. And if Israel initiates that confrontation, I think that is when Iran will actually throw down the gauntlet and really dive headfirst into the regional war. They may, if forced, I think they probably wouldn't make this move, but Yemen probably would start burning oil fields.
Right.
And once oil fields are attacked, that's when a regional crisis turns into a world crisis. Because the world can ignore the slaughter in Gaza. It cannot ignore the jump of fuel by a factor of 10. But this is all dependent on the fact that the negotiations fail and Netanyahu is given the green light to attack Iran, which is it's a completely contingent thing. As the way things are going now, I think Israel is, like, as I said earlier, there's a real risk that they complete the genocide in Gaza. And the question then is, like, can Gaza outlast this campaign longer than Israel can last its growing pariahdom? Like, at what point will the West, if not the West, then Europe, impose real costs on Israel? Like, that's the real question. And I mean, it's a very frightening question.
The depressing truth is also that they weather the pariahdom and accomplish the genocide, and then wait 2 or 3 generations for people to forget.
Yeah, that's
maybe they're also conscious of that.
I think there's a real dynamic, though, in Israeli society where the war with Iran is seen as necessary and inevitable. And at least before Trump was in office, it seems that the role of the U.S. was to sort of mediate between Iran and Israel and give Iran assurances that Israel won't attack Iran, right? But I got to imagine that those assurances aren't quite as strong now. And I could totally see a situation where they're given the green light to attack Iran directly, and then it plunges the entire region into a...
They can't take on Iran. They know that
they may not be able to take on Iran, but the point is that the Israeli sort of foreign policy is increasingly more erratic and seemingly like they're willing to take it to the very end.
Yeah,
almost
like
apocalyptic.
Like Israeli society and the state is in like the mode of Endseek. Like they are Führer bunker right now. Like we're gonna do this. We're gonna conquer the entire fucking world, no matter the cost. That mindset has, like, we have to be blunt. It actually has worked until now. They fucking destroyed a ton of their enemies. Which like gets to this like again like to sort of return to the periodization of the crisis. From like we get to July, we get to the assassinations and the woeful Axis response. Actually, let me step back a bit. Like another like sign that the Axis wasn't serious. It was early in 2024 when the PMF suspended their strikes, and for the justification, and their justification was so as not to embarrass the Iraqi government. Like what the fuck does like the U.S. constructed Iraqi government post 2003? You take your resistance orders from them. Like, and they're the closest ones to Iran in terms of like getting like who they take orders from. That to me like really signaled Iran told them to stop these strikes, even these bottle rockets, and calm down because they were, I don't know, like infringing on what Iran thought was like a hopes of a ceasefire, and then eventually like the ongoing negotiations. But yeah, returning to to summer this time. We have the so-called Axis responses for Hania, Fuad Shukr, and then Hudaydah. I think the Yemenis definitely wanted to do more for Hudaydah, but they didn't get the approval for it, or like the backing. Then we get to July passes, August passes, fucking September, and then we get to September, and this is when the campaign against Lebanon really escalates. This is when the pager attacks happen. This is when the Israelis start really terror bombing Lebanese society. Dahya, southern Lebanon, and I think also they begin attacking Bekaa, the valley. And they kill Nasrallah late September. I think it was 26th or 27th. And that is when, that was another major turning point. They've now killed like basically the unofficial spokesman or leader of the Axis. Like people, like the Axis is obviously like, you know, Iran is the architect of it, but Nasrallah was the guy. Like he was the one most identified with the Axis, and to kill him is really something else. Yeah. And they follow the assassination of Nasrallah with basically destroying the entire, not just the entire like first ring of Hezbollah leadership, all the top leaders, not just the second line of leadership, but even a huge chunk of the third line of leadership. So that's 3 fucking layers of possible replacements gone. If you look at the map, like the Israeli like org chart for the Radwan force and all the people that they've killed, I think it's like 4 layers of leaders have been exterminated. And that's the Hezbollah's like special forces unit.
Yeah.
The damage to their leadership was insane in September and then in October. And this is also not mentioning like the amount of fucking spies that were in Hezbollah that we're now getting a more insight into, the just how monitored they were because of their proximity to the Syrian regime, and also just the fact that like Israeli counterintelligence capabilities had just advanced over time. Financial Times had a really great piece as to like how did Hezbollah get, like how were they so severely caught off guard? And again, like the answer is in Syria. I think it's worth digressing a bit on what the Syrian intervention did to Hezbollah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something we definitely got to get into.
Which, like, in short, I've already spelled out my thesis of like this was an unmitigated disaster for Hezbollah and like the long-term effects of it. But I want to hear your guys first. I've been talking for a while.
Well, yeah, no, I think like I've heard your general thoughts on this, and I think it generally adds up that Hezbollah basically their intervention in Syria, it generally loses them prestige in the Arab world that they win in 2006. That is very much across the sectarian divide, as we kind of mentioned earlier. But I think regardless of how one feels about the right side to have taken in the Syrian civil war, I think it just because of how much of a hot button issue it was, I think it loses prestige for Hezbollah as well, and just because of how we've mentioned how much corruption and graft is built into the Assad state at this point. I think it does getting mixed up in that does kind of weaken Hezbollah.
At the same time, I can you can kind of quote unquote rationalize what they were doing.
Yeah.
Having a you can't even call it a country at that point, but just a land where a bunch of insane people are running around.
Yes.
Incredibly dangerous to have at your border, especially given the forces that are backing a lot of these militias and paramilitaries. And you can see why Hezbollah would want nothing like that by the border. So it does, you can see how it can make sense, but
no, it totally makes sense from a strategic standpoint. Like, you don't want the Assad regime to fall. Like,
it kind of reminds me of the gamble that the Soviets took in Afghanistan, which is, do you want to let an incredibly destabilized, dangerous situation on your border, or do you take the risk of trying to contain it? And I think probably in both cases, it would have been worth the risk of trying to contain it. But it, hindsight is always 20/20.
Right.
Yeah. No, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean that's kind of I can sort of see why they did do that. Yeah, I mean the Assads didn't have much love, so it's not really a popular figure to support. That's a euphemism.
It was, I mean, you guys pretty much spelled out what seemed to have been the least risky, although very politically damaging course of intervening in the Syrian conflict on the side of Assad. It ended up all the perceived benefits, like the increased recruitment, all the new weapon stocks, the more advanced capabilities, all those ended up having it was being counteracted by the long-term effects of the intervention. I think that the message that we're showing on the screen now, one of the top Hezbollah singers, this guy Mohammed Hadi Saleh, he was a fucking spy for the Israelis, sending a very high-ranking one as well, sending info on very top-level people in Hezbollah. And he did it for the value that he did it for is so obscene. It was for $23,000.
Oh my God.
That's how much the fact that someone like this could not only ascend the ranks but sell out for so cheap really shows.
Say $1 million. Damn, it's cheap to buy that guy. Fuck, right? Dude.
If you're gonna be a rat, at least be a rat for some money.
Yeah, goddamn.
Money.
23,000? The fuck's like a used car? What the fuck?
That's how. And this guy, he fought on the front line. He wasn't just a singer. He fought on the front lines in Syria for I think 1 or 2 years. Was immensely popular with Hezbollah, the organization, not just the militant wing. And this guy was an Israeli spy. Now just imagine how many other people are there like him, still in the ranks of the organization, let alone before any of them were discovered. And that's a direct result. And now the immediate question comes up is, how does someone like that even come up? How is he recruited? And this I was able to get a better sense of. The FT piece on Hezbollah's defeat, it passes over it kind of in pretty briefly. It says, they started letting in people they shouldn't have, but what does that mean? Basically, it's Hezbollah intervenes, and they realize our current manpower, which I think at the time 20,000 at the very most, is not enough for this war. We need a lot more guys. So they start recruiting more full-time fighters, and they start boosting their auxiliary ranks, and then even ranks of people who aren't officially Hezbollah or reserve Hezbollah, but in its orbit. And in like once they do that, that opens up room for all kinds of malevolent actors. Like one case, I won't share specifics, but there was this guy. He had his own problems. He's not suspected of like having betrayed Hezbollah, but he's like someone who never should have been in the organization because he had like personal issues which anyone could very easily exploit. And initially, for years, he'd been rejected. And they said, it's nothing personal, but we can't have you around us. With the Syrian intervention, they started letting him go on patrol. They started letting him handle logistical things, giving him more information, which perhaps on an individual level wouldn't be that important. But like when you have a lot of guys like that, it can paint a pretty vivid picture. And that picture ends up being devastating once put into effect. And that's what happened to Hezbollah. And then this is also like that's just from like infiltration and like actual people colluding with you. Then there's also the mere fact of Hezbollah's proximity to the Assad regime and its intelligence meant that whatever they told Assad, told the regime, ended up being leaked back to Israel because there were tons of moles in the regime. The regime just wasn't that secure to begin with, which is the more important thing. Like I don't think we should blame it purely on moles. It's just the fact that like these organizations had decayed and become less disciplined. They weren't as robust as they were in the past. Because it is actually possible as an organization to counteract moles and collusion if you're well structured enough. It is possible to do that, even if they are well placed moles. But we didn't have that in this case.
I think it's fair to say that maybe the only disciplined outfit in the whole Assad state was the Mukhabarat, was the secret police, for a while at least.
That was apparently the impression of Hezbollah operatives. But what's interesting is that they found is that the intelligence was also deeply despised. Because I mean, again, like Hezbollah, most of these guys, they aren't professional fighters, and even if they are professional fighters, there is like such a thing as like honor in combat. They weren't used to the kind of violence that the regime was inflicting, especially the Mukhabarat. So when they saw that, a lot of them were understandably shocked and said, like, what the fuck? like what do we do with this? So they wanted to sort of limit.
It's worth not that I'm like straightforwardly like support whatever forces want to throw Assad, but it's worth understanding just how corpulent and unmoral the Assadist regime was. Like really. So just like.
So yeah, you have like all this together, and then just again with the Israelis, like their intelligence capabilities had advanced a lot since 2006, and they put it to really effective use. They were collecting a lot of information. Like one thing that I like in hindsight should have been obvious, like this would hurt Hezbollah, is that they would release martyr biographies of guys who had been killed in Syria, and those martyr biographies, it's a blurb of a person's life, and if you collect all of the information from those, and again start doing like an org chart, figuring out who sits where, what do they represent, you can get a really good picture of the inside organization, even though these guys are dead. And by disclosing that kind of all of that is downstream from their intervention in Syria. What ended up happening is that like it induced a very long-term sickness in the organization that made it very vulnerable to Israeli attack. I think the Nasrallah assassination is actually really illustrative of this because I've heard several theories of what exactly led to it. One theory I heard from this like DGSE newspaper cutout called Intelligence Online. Their subscription is like over $1,000 per year, by the way.
Yeah, I've looked into it. They have some interesting stuff on there.
No, it's amazing. Their stuff is like, I consider it basically as good as gold. And they reported that Hezbollah, that there was like strong evidence that the Assad regime, even like the heart of the Assad regime, had sold out Nasrallah. And like when the war began, and when there was all the displacement into Syria, they reported something fascinating, which was that Hezbollah was orchestrating the entire like logistics of like taking care of refugees, like sending them into Syria. They didn't want the regime involved at all because they didn't trust them. And that's at their most vulnerable moment. Like if you can't trust your allies for something like that, like this indicates a really huge problem. So one theory is the Assad regime just straightforwardly sold Nasrallah. Another theory is that it was a top-ranking mole, like this Hezbollah singer guy, Mohammed Hadi Saleh, or another theory I heard from, I think, Hebrew media, which is that they put a microchip tracker on the negotiating papers, the ceasefire papers, and those were transferred to Nasrallah. And from that, they were able to track his location and bomb him, which again is another fucking instance of, like, you can't fucking do shit like that. Like, how, like, this is, like, these are peace talks. Like, how is anyone in the world supposed to take peace talks with the West seriously, or at least with the U.S. seriously, when the physical paper that they're reading could be used as a weapon against them? Like, every single diplomatic norm is being violated here.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, no, the message from this crisis seems to have basically been that it's pointless to do any kind of diplomacy with the West, and it's pointless to trust them on anything whatsoever.
Which is great for their diplomatic abilities, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So, I mean, one thing, I mean, it's kind of an aside, but it's worth stating. Kilgore Kraut makes a good point, which is, as soon as a disciplined or somewhat disciplined organization opens up their doors to whoever, it brings in all kinds of quote unquote seedy and unreliable elements. And that can really be the beginning of the end of an organization. So it's I mean, it's a tricky position, right? Because as you were saying, they needed more forces. In the case of, you know, the Soviets in World War I, they needed more forces, right? They also needed more party members, for instance, when they opened up their doors to recruitment. I can think of the FLN in Algeria. They did basically the same thing after the war, and you let in all kinds of opportunistic and corrupt elements. You know, I mean, it's so. What do you do? I don't know. That's the answer.
It's a really, I mean, it's made me like question of, like, was there a way that Hezbollah could have avoided the Syrian confrontation in general? And one person, again, this guy was surprised. He was pro Hezbollah, so I was surprised to hear this case from him. But he said, like, you know, it would have been possible in hindsight to negotiate with elements of the opposition and, like, create a pro-his constituency that could take over, because Assad was going to fall. We saw that he, once foreign support was withdrawn, he fell in 10 days. And what's also notable is that was the third time that Assad had come close to collapse. In this case, he finally collapsed, but in 2015, the Russians, before they intervened, Lavrov said that Assad was like a week away from collapse. And before the Iranians and Hezbollah intervened in like 2012, 2013, they said that he was very close to collapse. So, like, the regime was propped up entirely by foreign powers. So,
just like the opposition was propped up entirely by foreign powers.
Yeah, of course.
It's like not even, you know, people love to be, the Syrian civil war. It's kind of like, well, yes, but the whole thing is just a giant proxy mess. You know, poor Syrian people, by the way.
So, yeah, and then, like, I don't know. This is like, it's all just sort of alt history or counterfactual. It doesn't really matter now, but that's what ended. And the effects on Hezbollah were horrific. We saw how the Lebanon war ended up happening. There is like a glimmer in the sense that despite their leadership being destroyed and all these malls, we know for a fact that Hezbollah's combat skills, like actual on the ground combat skills, were robust. They held their own very well in the Lebanon war. And that, I think, is grounds in the sense that if they can somehow clean house and rebuild, they can get maybe to like 2006 levels again, but that'll take a very, very long time. But that's, again, that's just sort of my speculation.
You have a sense of the new leadership? I mean, for an organization to reverse like that, you really would need a very strong leadership. Quite frankly, with dictatorial powers to purge.
Yeah, that's one thing. That's like one reason why I'm kind of doomer. The current chief, Sheikh Naim Qasim, he has a really hard job. I honestly don't really blame him, because he has to explain Hezbollah's terrible defeat to the base and like get them to accept the reality of their situation. After years of like clear dominance, they are now very vulnerable. They have enemies, not only Israel, they've lost the Assad regime, and they now have tons of enemies within Lebanon that now have the advantage. my analysis of Naim Qasim's role is he's basically like helping Hezbollah's defeat go down a bit easier for the base, to get them to sort of accept a good amount of disarmament, and for them to become a more normal party in Lebanon. That's how I understand it. I think the organization, I have a very like dismal view. I think like the organization, like Hezbollah as we knew it, is gone. They're in a very new period. They now have to make some really tough choices and make a lot of big changes if they want to remain as a serious armed organization that can confront Israel. Whether they can do it or not, I won't predict, but I'm concerned. Again, I don't want to blame I don't want to blame Hezbollah because they really did sacrifice a lot, but like this is the situation that they're in, and it's very tough to watch.
Yeah, it's very hard to see where they can go from here. I mean, it's worth stating for people who might not know. I mean, Hezbollah is like really a society within a society in Lebanon.
Yeah.
They have military, but also robust civilian infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
They're despised by a lot of the Lebanese ruling class.
Yeah, I actually want to get into like how Lebanese society, like it's and like Hezbollah's place in it, ended up also hurting their war effort. Because Lebanon is such a divided society, it's so riven by confessional tensions. And because of the nature of the way that the Israelis prosecuted the war, they really leaned into sectarian divisions with the nature of the bombing campaign and displacement. And Hezbollah ended up having to, essentially they were fighting a two-front war. One was the actual war, and then there was the political war, which is like, we're now being pushed back on by Lebanese society, the rest of Lebanese society, that is. And we can't really handle this. And I think the reason they took the ceasefire deal is like the capitulation deal, which, like, if we want to be more brutally honest about it, is that there was the political pressure from broader Lebanese society, there was the military pressure to the bombing campaign, and then there was also the social pressure from their own base, which understandably could not tolerate the bombing any longer. They said, we need to end this now. And that's, I think, because of all these divisions and because of the fact that Lebanese society just has giant constituencies that are openly pro-Israel and pro-America, like the Maronites, the LF, like, what the fuck is Hezbollah supposed to do in that kind of situation? They could have preempted it by seizing the Lebanese state and reigniting the Lebanese civil war, essentially, and then trying to win it. But that's understandably a fucking gamble that they don't want to take. They took the safe route.
Right. I mean, and even like when that was like possible, like I feel like Syria like intervening was kind of like an ingredient in that.
Well, you don't have to worry about that because Syria can't really intervene in shit.
Right, and that's not a possibility anymore. So it's.
I mean, to be honest, they probably could win the military war, but the degree of like repression and terror that they would need to unleash would make it very hard for them to then operate effectively as a state, to do something like fight an armed struggle against, the Israelis. So it's kind of hard, I think that they were probably making these calculations too, and in many ways it's a capitulation, but also they're kind of put your head down and retreat, right?
It's so we see the war happen. Like on the ground they're doing well, but clearly internally they're suffering a lot. And then the capitulation deal happens, and this, I think there was this like one commentator, this one Egyptian guy, he like during when there was all these like the rumors of the ceasefire coming, he said like, we are now in critical hours in Lebanon. Either Hezbollah refuses, or and escalates in the same way the Rafah invasion was escalating the war, expanding its scope. And here I think, I'm not sure if this is possible, but I think had Hezbollah essentially forced the Axis to intervene like they intervened in Syria, I think that, and like forced the rest of Lebanese society to enter the war at gunpoint, I think that would have been quite radical, but maybe I don't want to say worthwhile, but like that would have been an escalation appropriate for the stakes, given what they were facing. That was one option. The other option was to take the deal and to cool the fronts and like very decisively turn things in favor of Israel. They ended up taking the ceasefire, and the next day, the HTS offensive begins. And I know we're almost coming up on time, but I briefly want to like touch on this. I think,
yeah, definitely. I feel like that's definitely.
I think a lot of people took the timing of the HTS offensive to indicate that they were collaborating with Israel. I actually had the opposite conclusion. The fact that they did it the day after the ceasefire, to me, suggested that they had been ready to do this offensive for quite some time, but were waiting for the moment that the war in Lebanon ended, because they don't want to look like they were fighting. They're literally fighting on the same side as Israel against the people who are fighting Israel. You don't want to look like that in the Middle East. So once the ceasefire happened, once it was declared, they said, all right, now is our moment, let's strike. It was a very political, it was very like PR conscious move. That's how I interpreted the timing. And I don't think they expected at all the Assad regime to collapse so quickly. But once they realized that it was collapsing, they basically went for broke. And that really sealed Hezbollah's fate. Like they were, I think when they signed the ceasefire, they were hoping, oh, we can rely on our depth in Syria to rebuild and like, recuperate. That fucking ended that. And there was a really curious statement that Julani made during the offensive. I think it was after they took Hamad. He said that we have prevented a regional war, which I thought was a really interesting thing to say, because it's like what regional war means is like that's the end of Israel. For him to say like, oh, we've now ended.
Like, yeah, you're bragging about saving Israel, basically.
Like what the fuck? But like that to me, it was like, all right, if the ceasefire cooled the fronts, this offensive has now basically ended the fronts. The war is no longer coming back on. There's no hope of like Lebanon reopening the front.
Islamists helping Israel. So very novel.
Yeah.
It's very, very novel in history.
Very, very, very nice. So we have like that's what happens with Syria. It ends up fucking collapsing. And that I think is like when, like, for me, that's like this is the end of the Axis. I personally don't believe the Axis as a whole will survive this, especially now that unity of fronts has been broken. Constituent parts will succeed and will survive, like Yemen, which has done very well given their what they have. They fucking went toe to toe with the entire U.S. Navy and the fucking British Air Force. Like they, I think, they'll do fine. And I trust that if there is like a broader, if the regional war ends up coming, they will be the ones to set fire to oil fields. They've done it before in 2019. And then that brings up the question of like, where does the Axis go from now? I think like, I sort of already answered it. Like I don't really think the Axis really exists anymore because unity of fronts is broken.
Yeah, it's cooked. It's cooked.
But and then like now the ceasefire has broken or was broken by Israel, and we're in this very dire situation. I mean, I don't know. It's things are fucking bleak. This is like the darkest moment of the genocide. Like,
yeah, and you've been reporting on a lot of what's going on internally in Gaza. The situation with the bandits has been getting really bad.
Yeah. If we have time, I can discuss that as well.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, we have time. We have time.
So yeah, the bandits. Let's we should wind back a bit because banditry in Gaza, once the war broke out, like people escaped from prisons in Gaza, like malevolent, like sinister actors. But that's like sort of, it takes a while for that from between that and what we're seeing, like the kind of bandit networks that are operating now. Like there's a lot of steps that have to go.
Right. It's like the networks are getting like very organized and have a lot of outside actors backing
So
them
the origins of this particular network, the one led by Yasser Abu Shabab, I think it was after the invasion of Rafah in May 2024, because that's like when the Israelis actually occupied the south, which is the main entry point of aid. And when Hamas actually could have, like, police officers could have transmitted it to the people who needed it. With the invasion, they start killing tons of cops, and they unleash chaos, letting people like Shabab start taking control. The network seemed to have taken shape, or did in fact take shape, over the summer of 2024, by the point to where, like, by fall 2024, it was already pretty advanced. They were stealing a lot of shit. This is when Western media starts reporting on it. Like, FT had a really great piece on how warlordism and banditry is, like, strangling Gaza. They had footage of, like, one bandit raid. It's really frightening. And I think the UN released a report in November saying that they're operating in a military-style compound right next to the fucking IDF. They're operating under IDF protection. So we know, by fall at least, an alliance between banditry and the IDF has been formed. But I think there was still a lot of, like, gaps, so to speak, as to, like, the formation of the strategy. And Hamas also at this time begins its anti-banditry operations. In November, they killed about 20 bandits in one operation, including 2 really high-ranking ones who were, like, very close lieutenants, like 2 brothers of the guy Yasser Abu Shabab himself.
Yeah, good.
But he narrowly escaped, and then I think they almost killed him again in December. So, like, the bandit networks, they were dealt really heavy blows in the fall. In the north, like in northern Gaza, Hamas unleashed a crackdown in spring of 2024, beginning with the abduction and execution of a notorious family of bandits who had been profiteering and, like, actively sabotaging, like, resistance operations. From what I could tell from talking to people there, that cracked down on banditry quite a lot. Like in Beit Lahia, Hamas published images of them sending out food rations and, like, trying to set up IDP camps, like, in what little green land remained in the north. So, like, you could see that Hamas is, like, really trying hard and to some extent succeeding in reestablishing civilian government. I think part of what motivated the general's plan was to destroy that in its crib. But they weren't able to do that kind of operation in the south because of the Rafah invasion. And that this also coincided with, like, there was a lot of talk early in the genocide of, like, we're gonna, like, the IDF speaking, like, oh, we're gonna get the tribes to rule Gaza again.
Right.
And this is very obviously, like, mimicking what the U.S. did in the Iraq War, which was the Sahawat, the awakening movement, like, where they started bribing Sunni tribes to stop fighting America and to flip over to the coalition. They tried doing that. This didn't work because Hamas had already successfully co-opted the tribes way back, like, over a decade ago. That failed. I think in fall is probably when they started thinking, oh, maybe we can use this as our Sahawat. But there's still a lot of kinks to be worked out. And that, like, the plan as a whole, it was put on hold because of the ceasefire. Like, the Israelis withdrew from a lot of it. I think they still occupied the Philadelphia axis, though, which is the one in the south that borders Egypt, that Egypt is supposed to fucking safeguard per Camp David, but apparently not. As a side note, Egypt is, like, a fucking active party to the famine, but, like, it's whatever.
Yeah, I think that is completely fair to say.
Like, all right, guys, but that's not the humor there. I think during the ceasefire, while the IDF still occupied the Philadelphia axis, this is, like, when they sheltered what remained of the Abu Shabab network and like, came up with their next and the current plot, the current phase of the bandit plot, the so-called Gaza Sahawat. This is when they reimposed the siege on all of Gaza in March, shortly before they broke the ceasefire. And I think in early April is when we saw those images of Shabab in the uniform, guarding some checkpoint. This is, I think, when PA also got involved. They're vigorously denying any sort of involvement in it, but Shabab is constantly saying, I'm operating under the legitimate authority, the legitimate Palestinian authority. He's the one fucking spelling out the game here. And all the bandits on their social media pages they keep saying we are operating under, like, we are returning the PA to Gaza. We are like using open Fatah rhetoric. We are the sons of Fatah. We are operating. There was one post in particular which I found really fucking shocking. One bandit said, "We're operating under Majid Faraj, the PA intelligence chief." They're denying this, but the strategy now seems to be, or in fact is, by seizing control of humanitarian aid and thus setting up these sort of GHF fucking concentration camps where we're able to control who gets food. We can coerce the Gaza population to come to the south under our control, away from Hamas, and thus, like, under the operation of the PA, we can finally bring back the PA into Gaza through this mechanism. This is much more effective than the previous plots against Hamas from within Gaza, because this is attacking the physical existence of Gazan society. Like, people have to eat and have to drink. So they're betting that people will acquiesce to this plot even if they hate Fatah, because they have no other choice to survive. I reported on this initially, I started tracking it 2 weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks ago. And I reported on it I don't know, at this point, 2 weeks ago. So it must have been 3 weeks when I started looking at it. But in any case, I posted that thread about the PA's collusion. And now the media is covering it. Which to me suggests that the Western establishment isn't very happy with this plot because it's way too blatant. They can't really deny. There's no plausible deniability here. Like, fucking Lieberman said that we are backing these bandits, we are arming them, we are paying them. Yasser Abu Shabab today just gave an interview with Hebrew media, saying that he's operating under the Palestinian, I think he said under a legitimate authority, that is to say the PA, and a bunch of other very revealing answers. So you have this fucking, it's, the Wall Street Journal, they did a piece about Yasser Abu Shabab, calling him a gangster and shit. And now you have Mohammed Shahada. He's covering this story for, he's the main sort of Palestinian analyst for Western media. I don't think the West is very happy with this, not because they're opposed to famine. Maybe Europe is opposed to the famine. But the U.S. isn't. But all of them, I think, are displeased with how blatant and overt this plot is. They want something a bit more subtle and a bit more deniable than what Israel is doing right now. Which is why maybe this is fucking pure cope. I don't think this network is going to last too long. I think there is going to be a point where Israel cuts them loose, and instead of rescuing them like the SLA in Lebanon, they're just going to toss them to Hamas. Because during the ceasefire, reportedly, Yasser Abu Shabab offered Hamas millions of dollars that he had made from fucking banditry, so that they wouldn't kill him. He was also an escaped prisoner.
Yeah. It's and also Israel hates the Fatah guys as well. They're that racist. The Fatah guys are scum, obviously, and they're more than happy to use them as capos for their extermination schemes. But in the end, they also see them as subhuman. They'll throw them to the wolves.
Yeah, that's what the whole Lieberman saying this is the equivalent of ISIS in Gaza. We need to cut these guys loose. I think that's another thing that's worth discussing, because there's some element of sensationalism here, ISIS linked. First off, I think you have these fucking ghoulish NetSec people who are oh, this isn't actually ISIS. That's bullshit. Just today, Ynet reported one of the bandits, at least one of them, is a confirmed ex-IS member. He fought in the Sinai against the Egyptian army. There's your ISIS link right there, guys. But I think there's also I do agree that there's some kind of sensationalism, and that people are projecting too much ideology onto these guys. The only ideology they have is hatred of Hamas. They're just lumpen bandits and mercenaries for hire. And the bourgeoisie that's hiring them is Israel. And within Gaza, the Gaza underworld, apolitical bandits and anti-Hamas Salafis, they rub shoulders a lot, and oftentimes are just the same thing. These bandits will use Salafi ideology to mask their essentially criminal character. This ex-IS guy, I I'm honestly kind of skeptical that he has much ideology, but like him joining IS was just a way to like find somebody who hates Hamas and is like, willing to fight and is willing to pay him.
Yeah, these are elements remind me of like Ben Mukhtar, like Mr. Marlboro. So, there very much is a tendency for like Salafi like militias to like just like incorporate like lumpen pro.
Yeah.
Like it's actually quite it's a tendency. But yeah, for people who don't know, Ben Mukhtar is like he's an Algerian Islamist, and he runs like a bandit like smuggling network where they like smuggle and like distribute Marlboro throughout North Africa and stuff like that. He got rich off that shit, and yeah, he's total lumpen pro, just criminal guy. Yeah,
and that's like that's what the Gaza underworld is, and that's what these bandits emerge from. So like whenever like the IS link is real, and because they are criminals, they're gonna a lot of like Yasser Shabab previously, he was a smuggler into the Sinai. And that means rubbing shoulders with IS Sinai because they rely on smugglers. They need like criminal connections. And he like in that sense materially aided this organization. So like it's far more accurate to call them IS linked than not IS linked. Like I think the pushback on that is fucking ridiculous. These people, like if you're fucking cutting deals with these kind of people, then you are linked to them objectively. Yeah, this is a great way to put it. So yeah, I mean, I think like as for how long, like what like the state of the bandits now, they're trying to give the image of professionalization. All their like a lot of their media like uses uniforms. They have real uniforms, obviously, but like they're still just fucking thugs and gangsters.
What are they, clown outfits? Jesus Christ!
Like it's fucking. What's really frightening is that one of the top bandits, this guy Hassan Aziz Duhini or Duhini, he he posted a picture of PA officers in the West Bank as like an aspirational thing, like, oh, we see ourselves in them. We are them, but here. So like,
it's so fucking weird to me. Like, I just don't understand like how you see what Fatah has become as like appealing in any way whatsoever.
I don't like. I'm still trying to figure it out. I think a lot of it is really deranged resentment against Hamas because apparently this guy Duhini, he was like. Ynet reported that he was involved in the Gilad Shalit abduction, the 2000, like the one that led to Sinwar's release. He was in the organization. Like there was and still is this trend of Fatah people becoming anti-Hamas Salafis. There's like two infamous clans, one particularly infamous clan in Gaza called the Dogmush, and they used to be a very strong Fatah stronghold. And once Fatah was overthrown, they flipped over to Salafi jihadists like Jaish al-Islam or Jand Ansar Allah, who were fighting Hamas. And Duhini seems to be part of this trend. Like he used to be Fatah, then joined Jaish al-Islam, then is now apparently back to being Fatah as a bandit. And like they're now fucking wearing T-shirts with Hebrew script.
And T-shirts with the instructor in Hebrew.
Yeah, like it's so blatantly an Israeli.
Like Punisher, but Israeli.
I guess, man. Like,
what the fuck is that? The instructor?
It's like I think it's meant to be like training uniform. Like, oh, I'm the teacher, like in this camp.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah.
But like, it's still weird. That they're
cool, but no.
Like, I still don't really understand how a person even becomes like this. Because like these people are fucking terrifying. And the fact that they have the same sickness that the Israelis do, that IDF does, which is posting their war crimes on social media. And one guy, like Duhini, he had one post where he was saying, he was literally telling people in Gaza, like, dignity costs more than hunger. So you should fight against Hamas instead of trying to get food. That will end this crisis sooner than ending the famine. Basically, that was his message.
How is working for the people genociding you dignified? You animal! What the hell does that even? What kind of logic is that?
I don't know, man. And like that guy in particular is also like implicated in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, so-called. Like he posted pictures, like images of himself with food parcels there. So like the fucking U.S. is now directly implicated.
Yeah. Let's be honest. Probably a lot of these people are just so cynical that they just want to get out of this alive and well. You know, they'll say and do anything. You know,
that's also probably part of it. I think there's also a big tribal connection. The main tribe that's involved in this, that's infamous locally in Gaza, is the Tarabin. They like previously were a Fatah like constituency. They were disarmed during the conflict, like the Civil War conflict in 2006 or 2007, and now they're taking their revenge. Like they frame it on Facebook in explicitly tribal terms that like the sons of the Tarabin tribe are back.
So it's about getting their tribe out of it alive and well. And on
Pretty
top.
much, that seems to be like that's my interpretation of it.
Damn, bro. In Algeria, we have tribal shit, but doesn't seem to be as intense as a lot of, like, I don't know. It's more region. I don't know. Actually, it's not true. I don't know what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, come to think of it, actually, yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah.
Tribalism is bad. It's bad.
Very not good.
Hyper local ways of thinking that make it very hard for people to have universal modes of practical reasoning and of conducting their life. It's really not good overall.
Yeah, I am somewhat optimistic in that like the Hamas operation against the bandits was deep in Rafah. So that indicates that like Hamas's intelligence collection is quite robust. Like we've known this for a while, but like now it's like better than we thought. It's just like the fact that like the IDF is there at all times limits what they can do physically. And then also like within the Gaza underworld, the Salafis in particular, there's a split seemingly between like within the anti-Hamas guys who like a lot of them, I'd say it seems my impression is most of them, but let's say like 50-50. Half of them have flipped over back to Hamas because they're like, we're not going to fucking side with the Jews against Palestine. We're not going to do this.
Yeah.
Like we're going to enter like a united front. And like, I saw like there were initial signs of this. I didn't know what to make of it at the time, but now with this information, it makes sense. Like there's this one group, Hurasa al-Nusra, like a self-avowed jihadist group, like aligned to Al-Qaeda. In the north, they said we did a joint operation with one of the jihadist groups here. And I thought that was a reference to like a Qassam unit or like one of the resistance units. Now I think it was like a Salafi cell or like band that was fighting locally and that had joined forces with the broader resistance. So that's also definitely like a trend.
Yeah, I like what Gramatu, I don't know what that name is, man, but it's literally just petty bourgeois rage, but tribal bandits. Yeah. I used to own a nice piece or part of the smuggling network, all thanks to PA, but Hamas destroyed it. Yeah, that's definitely probably part of it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's just depressing, like reading about the early days of Fatah when they were like the ones like leading the armed struggle and like pushing like Arab states to actually like confront Israel, and now they're just quislings and capos and just the most pathetic collaborators.
Yeah, PA is what the hell. I mean,
yeah, it's a depressing story.
Yeah, it really is. It really is, and that's something Donald, maybe hopefully we can get that guy who runs that blog, The Angry Arab, to.
Yeah, I got to follow up with him. But
yeah. Well, thank you, Rob. That was I learned a tremendous amount about the history, the axis of resistance. Now we were talking about these banditry circles. Unfortunately, depressing, but it's good to know what's happening.
Yep.
And I think that despite the fact that things are very bleak, diplomatically things have never been worse for Israel. And I'm sure you probably have a recollection of what it was like being anti-Zionist in this country.
Oh yeah,
as an Arab, it was to say demoralizing and scary is maybe even an understatement. But
even things like 3 years ago, it was
it was very, very difficult. And now, it's possible to express these things. And in fact, the majority of people of our generation they see the evil in front of them and they can't deny it any longer. So as depressing as things are on the ground, and as much as we look at, feel shame for what's happening to the Palestinian people, things have changed.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I do feel a lot of guilt for not having done enough to stop things from getting to this point.
What the fuck can you do?
But
like one quick point about that. I think like on the one hand, I totally agree with that sentiment because like all of us should be ashamed for like, failing Gaza and Palestine as a whole. But on the other hand, I think like Jamil said, like what can we do if like the Arab world is not gonna stand up and fulfill its historical duty to Palestine? Like what are we gonna do across the planet? There's only so much we can do. I'm hoping that like this current moment with like LA and the opposition against ICE will turn into something big.
Yeah.
Build a socialist movement.
Yeah, I guess
what we can do. But seriously, one that takes imperialism and the inequality between peoples seriously. Yeah.
Oh, someone asked, do you have a take on the march to Gaza and the Freedom Flotilla?
Obviously support it. I just don't really know. I haven't really kept too much track of that. I think the Freedom Flotilla is actually really close now, and of course, Israel has said that we're going to intercept it. But I mean,
I could even see them fucking shooting them, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, no,
Greta Thunberg. I could see them like shooting them, like, oh, we didn't know.
Yeah. But I do think this shows like one avenue of like popular support. Like if, say for instance, there's like 10 ships going to Gaza at once, would the Israelis bomb all of them? Possibly. It's quite like there's no real limit for them anymore. But
who knows?
Like, but at the same time, like how much, like, could they just keep doing that?
They're killing aid workers from France, Britain. They're killing citizens from European countries. They don't give a shit. They're killing Americans. They don't give a shit. It would be pretty. I think that they might not be that stupid though, PR wise.
I don't know, dude. Because like, that's the other thing is like, there have been so many times in this crisis where I thought there's no way the Israelis are that dumb or that insane. And
they're totally high on this like Jewish supremacist ideology where they think they can just do anything and it's okay. Like they really believe their own bullshit.
Yeah, they're 100% confident, and they're correct that as long as the U.S. state supports them, they can do whatever the fuck they want, anything.
Basically. Well, who's gonna stop them? No one is stopping them.
There are no consequences. So
I think, I guess maybe then the question is like, how many people, like if there were more freedom flotillas, like what would be enough to make like Western populations to like really, right now Western populations are against their actions of their government, but not doing anything. Is there a point where Israeli attacks on like Western aid workers would force them to start protesting and start rioting in a really concerted way? I don't know. I'm skeptical. But this is like a pretty new kind of solidarity, like sending ships to an active.
Listen, to be honest, the Europeans have the masses have been better than Americans. I mean, the other day in early March, there was like a fucking 1 million strong march at the Hague or something. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I mean, like from what I can tell, Europeans are really disgusted. The vast majority, I think, of France is just like disgusted by this. So
well, certainly their media is a lot more openly against what's happening.
I mean, I think some of their media is just reporting what's happening.
That's an important distinction then. Yeah, because our media is acting as PR liaisons for the Israeli government essentially.
I mean, in France, for instance, like the ruling class is still deeply Zionist.
Isn't that the case, like, in all of the West, though? Like, the ruling class is fanatically Zionist, whereas the broader public is not anti-Zionist, non-Zionist.
Except for the U.S., where for the long time the masses were also rabidly Zionist. But yes,
this is
in
true.
Western Europe, like it's mostly been just people have been maybe not principally anti-Zionist, but critical of Israel in ways you wouldn't find in the U.S. But it's gotten to the point where like even like a lot of the ruling political class in Spain, for instance, it's like, what the you guys are assassins, you know what I'm saying? Which is, I mean,
do we think that do you guys think that there is a chance that the EU imposes the kind of measures that FT was calling for? I'm skeptical.
I actually think it's kind of getting maybe, yeah, honestly.
Do you think they would do that without American support? Because I think that would be the determining factor.
I think they will. I think that I won't say, it's guaranteed. It could go but there is a probability and a less than negligible probability that people start cutting economic and military ties with
when you have the German government, which is probably the most the most Zionist entity outside of Israel.
Yeah, and, more. There's an expression in French which is more monarchist than the king. Though they're more Zionist than the Zionists.
Right, exactly.
But even they are starting to be like, "What the fuck is this?" And I think people like Macron are also just getting really sick of being told what to do by the U.S. and Israel.
That's another really big element of this because it's being kind of blunt. It is just planetary, Israel. Israel just controls.
And through the U.S. and but they're it's getting to a point where they're like, we are sick of taking shit, and they beat up some Catholic priest or a diplomatic delegation from France that was visiting Jerusalem. Which, by the way, why are they doing that right now? But it was some years ago, I think, or at some point in the war, and the Israelis beat them up, and the French were like, what are you doing? You can't beat up our diplomatic delegation at a holy site, by the way. It was a church, like an ancient church. So I mean, it's I think it's getting to the point where they're getting pretty tired of taking shit, and it's in part about them asserting their importance globally. But I think there's a less than negligible chance that at least with places like Spain, France, even Italy.
I think also the Russia element here is worth getting into because this Israel shit really hurts Europe's case against Russia. Because if we're opposing what Russia is doing in Ukraine, how can we possibly support what Israel is doing here? If they're ripping up international law and all of these mechanisms that are used to discipline Russia, the ICC, for instance. Orban invited Netanyahu, and Hungary is legally obligated to arrest him. What's to stop Putin coming to Hungary next? And that will infuriate. And that basically rips up the fucking Rome Statute as far as Europe is concerned. They can't tolerate that. Norway, for instance, which has been really good on, relatively speaking, obviously, good on Palestine, is also one of the harshest Russia hawks. Because of and those two things are very deeply connected for them, politically. So I think that's another angle that may induce the EU into getting its act together. But again, I'm
right. And I think the US, I think they might just, as the US state, they're looking to Palantir to develop a database that probably is just going to track, supposed anti-Semites. It just seems like the government is basically just trying to make it so that they can completely shield themselves from any kind of public opinion around Israel and just completely enforce the Zionist line.
Yeah, okay, so I'm reading right here. This is no bueno, but apparently France and the UK backed off from recognizing a Palestinian state. So that was expected, but they had been making overtures that they would, which I didn't buy. Spain, though, I think Spain straight up recognized.
No, they've already.
Yeah, exactly.
Spain has been pretty anti-Israel relatively.
Given the standards, they've been the best in Europe by far. But yeah, it's at least things are shifting diplomatically. That's maybe I don't want to just I'm very doomer in many ways too, and who knows how bad the situation will get in Gaza. It seems like there's no limit, but at least diplomatically, Israel is fucked. They are fucked. Like,
we've got a W there. We have
yeah,
a W there.
honestly, they are fucked. They have lost the diplomatic war. And it's, I mean, I can see how they would come. Time might cure things, but
yeah, but I also don't think this is the end of their horrors. Like, I think they're going to keep on expanding this war. And
I mean, if the program of Greater Israel becomes more and more,
yeah, it seems like they actually are trying to do the Yinon plan, basically.
Listen, Greater Israel goes all the way to Japan. Okay. At this point, the expansionist genocidal movement is just growing and growing, and so
that would like legit end Israel though. Like, the more Arabs they bring into their borders is the more people that would fight Israel. Like, the reason that so many Arab states can ignore like the Palestine question is the fact that Israel directly isn't their problem.
Well, look, they might rediscover Mein Kampf, right? Like no, but honestly, like, you probably will see like political movements being like, well, we'll kill many, enslave the rest, and be the majority. I mean, like, they might literally just, because of the quote unquote logic of the situation, rediscover not like Nazism, like very literally.
Well, it seems like they're doing a good job at it already.
Well, they are, but I mean, literally someone writing like a fucking Mein Kampf and making that like the manifesto of their movement. I mean, as far as I know, close to that, but they haven't quite gotten there. But they probably will. I mean, given how things are. Given how things are evolving.
Have you seen Israeli Twitter?
Yeah. It's pretty much they're pretty much for a Holocaust.
I think what may precipitate that, and this is the last thing to say, is growing like the legal battle against Israeli officials and troops. Like, there's every day there's like more and more like cases being filed. Like, I thought there was a case being filed in France, and then also in Spain, I think. And like the ICC is apparently preparing warrants against Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. And like Yunus Tarawi, the GOAT, is like has been preparing a massive file of IDF soldiers like responsible for war crimes. So I think that may also be like a precipitating.
Yeah. I mean, you do see like occasional like posts about like, I don't know, some hotel in Japan being like, you can't come here if you did work, or you can't come here if you're in the IDF or whatever, which is pretty cool to see, but unfortunately not a systematic thing. But yeah, I mean.
And hey, Rob, before you got to go, let's. I'm gonna put your Substack link up on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, everyone, check out Rob's Substack. He's got some very, very interesting stuff on jihadism in the Sahel region.
And read his work in Cosmonaut magazine. It's really it's really
Part 4 on the Iraqi resistance is in the works.
Yeah,
in a few weeks.
It's like the best history you're gonna get on the Iraqi insurgency, quite frankly.
But yeah. Thanks for coming on.
Maybe even worth trying to collate into a little Cosmonaut book.
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea.
Yeah, you expand some stuff, add some stuff. We get an intro being like, this is an awesome thing. Maybe Cosmonaut Press can publish it as a little as a book.
Yeah, check out Rob's Substack, guys, and thanks for coming on, man. I think this was a very educational episode for everyone.
I learned a lot. Thank you a lot.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.
So yeah, I think you got to go soon.
Yeah, I got to go soon.
But no, that was a great interview. I think before we sign off, I just kind of wanted to give a red salute to the protesters in LA who are throwing down right now.
Yeah, hell yeah, keep it up, doing the good work. You guys are a light in all of the darkness.
Yeah, no, I was saying earlier, like, there's just been so much horrible stuff happening every fucking day, and seeing that people are actually fighting back against these ICE thugs is very, very much restored some level of faith in humanity in this country and in the world in general. So
yeah, so thank you guys.
Yeah, no.
I hope that becomes an example.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people are saying like, "Oh, this is all just a false flag. This is all just a Fed op. Don't, fight back." I'm seeing people say this stuff like,
What?
Yeah, some idiot from
DSA?
No, not DSA, from ACP. Can't say I'm surprised.
Yo, they need to die off.
Yeah, they need to die off. Hold on, let me bring it up just so we can laugh at it, because I do kind of like want to laugh at how stupid this is.
So they like ICE, I'm guessing.
Honestly, I think they kind of they don't want to admit it, but
they have a position against like immigration, right?
They're against mass immigration, is what their position is.
So like the basis,
and they have members who are pro.
The basis of the United States, just like mass migration,
right.
genocide, like fuck me.
Yeah, this idiot Chris Morlock. He says communists should avoid establishment and media manufactured street violence.
Why does he have to capitalize everything? I didn't realize that media manufactured street violence was a proper noun that you find in the fucking dictionary.
The situation in Los Angeles is being heavily developed and run by the DNC. Biden deported 4.7 million people in his first term.
I too can make things up. I too conjure ideas in my brain. And
the thing is, I haven't seen a single DNC politician like cheering on these protests.
It's the opposite. They're silent.
Yeah, they're telling people to go home, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
They do not want this. They do not want chaos in the streets, because in their mind, this is just playing into Trump, which is what you're arguing, probably.
I thought they wanted Trump.
The DNC is mobilizing this unrest to weaken public support and create the same mayhem out of 2019 and 2020. It's not worth it for communists to pick a side here. Oh my God. See, this is just...
What a load of shit, dude.
Yeah, what a load of shit. And so this is all just the DNC plot, according to this guy. Degenerate legacy communoid and Marxoid orgs are most likely at the forefront of spurring the spectacle on as usual. They want a Chaz 2.0 and oh my God.
Oh, he's good. They're going on about
what is this guy talking about?
Yeah, I don't know, bro. He needs help.
No, it's just, this is just absolutely pathetic. So yeah, no, it's
Jesus. Okay.
And now the ACP put out an official statement saying that this is the sign of a second American Civil War.
Oh my God. These people are so funny, dude. I love it. It's so funny.
So they do condemn ICE as unconstitutional expansion, but it's empowered by an electoral mandate. On the other hand, lies a clear rupture at the level of government between federal and state levels and widespread
Please stop reading this. I can't.
Due to historical and civilizational considerations, the party regards the Mexican people living in Southern California as part of the American people, regardless of their formal. Thanks for making that consideration, guys. Simultaneously, it also recognizes how the Democratic Party is attempting to employ these protesters as their political pawns.
Man, these people suck, dude.
Yeah, attempting to depose the Trump administration due to its foreign policy what the fuck? It's foreign policy orientation that's completely pro-Israel and is currently escalating with Russia. Like,
yeah, come on, just ridiculous, man.
So it seems like they're telling people to not participate in these protests and not even take a side.
Okay, whatever. Go to
so pathetic. So pathetic.
Go to an ACP meeting and ruin your life. That's
yeah, no, that is deeply
pathetic. With feds or whatever.
No, listen, this is obviously spontaneous protest movements aren't going to defeat Trump. We're not anarchists here, but it is something that we need to engage in and something we need to support, and we need to build on this energy.
It is a signal that people are willing to take risks to oppose state actions which they find to be egregious.
Exactly. It shows that the public, there's large segments of the public who find this egregious, who are willing to take action against the state, and we commend you for doing that.
Yeah, we do, because that's what we need. We need people to fight. We need to struggle.
Yeah, there needs to be resistance against ICE thugs.
Yeah, these people are sociopaths. They are employing sociopaths.
Yeah, there was another stupid post that was more liberal from this one guy that was like, violent protests are not the answer.
Well, what is the answer, you idiot?
You literally said, like, marry an immigrant so they can become legal.
That's not... That what? What do
I'm
you?
not joking. Hold on, let me bring it up. He's like this leftist guy who posts out men's wear stuff.
Basically, he wants 90 Day Fiance as a social protest. That's
I
not
admire the courage of people protesting the ICE raids in California. I'm against violent protests and think they're counterproductive.
Wait, why is this guy? Isn't this guy the fashion guy? Why is he weighing in?
Yeah,
on it?
I mean,
also, what is your evidence for that claim? There have been plenty of instances where violent struggle got the goods.
I know.
Like, and this is not violent. They haven't what's so violent? People don't know what violence is, bro. They don't know. Basically, anything that's impolite, and isn't based on please, thank you, sir dialogue is violence for them.
Yeah, it's just pathetic. Like,
this is not violent. This is people just not accepting that you can cage children and families for no fucking reason, basically.
Yeah.
It's just crazy, dude.
So anyway, it's the men's fashion guy.
Yeah,
but
I'm winning.
So
maybe stick to fashion, bro.
I don't think that it takes a genius here to support what's going on. You don't have to have the political acumen. I think it's very clear that this is the beginning of some actual resistance to the MAGA agenda, and I think it's we have to support it, obviously.
Absolutely.
And it's also the Palantir stuff that was announced, and then the Trump Elon split happens, and then this happens, and it looks like Trump is they're doing martial law. They're sending in the National Guard to LA. They're saying that they're going to be there for like an extended period of time. So I don't know. The next few days are going to be intense, guys. I think we definitely need to be paying attention to what's going on.
Kind of feels like decades are happening, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
And I think like some people are saying like, oh, this is all just a trap. Like this is all just a trap to like create martial law. But I think people have to resist against what's going on against ICE. Like it's not an option not to fight back against these ICE thugs and just let them have a free hand.
Yeah, I mean
the alternative is do nothing and let them round people up off the street.
Exactly. That's not like a noble way to live.
But what communists can do is provide a political direction, not
exactly. Our goal is not to tell people to stand down and not to resist, but to provide political direction and to build institutions that can, build up the struggle. So I don't know. Hopefully DSA can actually do something useful here and not just be idiots. And I don't know. We'll see what happens. But anyway, I think that's a good point to stop, everyone. Good show, everyone. My camera kind of stopped working in the middle of the show, so you can't all see my beautiful face, but we can't hear you, Jamil.
Oh, thanks everyone for tuning in. Just please share this with your friends, share this with your family, share this with your colleagues,
with your coworkers, your boss.
Yeah, we have a Patreon. Please donate. We need it.
Please donate. And
Cosmonaut Magazine. Check out Cosmonaut Magazine itself. We got great content. We got a great podcast. And thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week to talk some good stuff.
Yep, we'll have another show next week, every Sunday. So stay tuned in.
Okay, everyone. Take care.
See you next Sunday.